Okay, so we have 20 minutes, so that it will be quick, and we'll see if we can leave some time for questions. But we have the coffee break afterwards, so hopefully we can continue. So my name is Kutlu Kazancı. So I've worked with technology companies actually since the late 90s, some in the US, in Turkey, and now for the 2 years in UK, set up a UK-based camp, which is an advisory and biz dev consulting company for technology companies. Eren is, he also moved to the UK about, well, he's his second year. He's been running NBT for 5 years, which is a full-service digital marketing machine. So I think maybe we'll have some chance to talk about that. And previously, he worked at our sponsor, İşbank, for quite a few years. And Elias brings about 25 years of FMCG and technology experience. Started with Pepsi, and then worked at Expedia, worked in Grupanya in Turkey, and then Groupon stole him. And then now he's doing genome business growth, and he's a growth advisory. So we'll try to understand what that entails. And Ian Collins is, he's a partner and mentor to UK Basecamp, and he's doing two things. Radium is a biz dev agency for internationalizing and scale-ups. And he's also founder of GoToMarket, which is helping UK scale-ups expand to the US. And previously, he also brings decades of experience in software development, technology, and he was a co-founder of Woto, which is a company that also received angel investment from the Galata Business Angels. So here you have people who have experience both in Turkey and also outside of Turkey, and we'll try to delve into how to help scale-ups coming from Turkey. Okay, so the first question I want to start with is, I think most of the startups here in Webrazzi are Turkish startups with some product market fit, some revenue, getting to revenue or some revenue, and they want to internationalize, and UK is a top priority for them. So for each one of you, what do you think are the 3 most important things for them to focus, 3 challenges or items to focus, and you can answer that separately for B2B, B2C if you wish. Eren.
I can start first. Hello everyone, first of all. Good question. It will be better to divide the B2B and B2C. Let's start from the B2B. For B2B, in terms of the marketing point of view, native content will be most critical thing, because most of the B2B companies are focusing on inbound marketing strategy. That means the pulling your potential customers with the content. And for the UK market, if you will be doing content marketing, your content should be native. The second one, I can say remarketing, because for B2B companies, in most of them, one of the major problems are the long sales cycles, and it will be much more longer in UK. That's why the remarketing activities will enable them to decrease their sales cycles. And as a third, maybe it's similar with the second one, but the sales and marketing teams should work much more closer, because once a lead will be generated, then the feedback, whether the lead is qualified or non-qualified, should come to the marketing side much more quicker, because in UK you will be in a much more competitive market, much more expensive market in terms of the especially advertising budget. That's why the feedback should come much more faster. For B2C, to be honest, for B2C companies, it's little bit harder than the B2B companies, because in B2C companies, you are in a different market with different consumer behavior. That's why I can say the first critical factor will be search engine. That's why both the search engine optimization and the AdWords strategies will be changed, because there are different type of search habits in UK and very, very expensive comparing to the other markets. The second one will be social media. Again, when you are in the B2C, you are dealing with the human directly, and you are dealing with lots of people. That's why the social media dynamics will be different in terms of both paid and the both organic part. And as a third, I can say the earned media and PR, even the influencers will be much more different here. That's why if you would like to penetrate in the UK market, first of all, you're gonna detect who are the influencers in your field.
Okay, wonderful. A lot of material there to chew on. Elias, what would you like to add to that, or any points of difference?
Yeah, I mean, international expansion is quite a digression for management. So first and foremost, get your backyard sorted out, have your processes, your workflows, and know exactly what, because you're at the stage where you're still growing and you're using probably friends and family, and still a lot of fast-moving stuff that doesn't require a ton of grip, but you're going to need that grip as you start to go anywhere, let alone into the UK. So build out those processes and get yourself prepared for scaling up. Secondly, do the research. The UK is a large market. It's probably flooded with similar services, but that's okay. If you know your product, you think that your service and it's strong enough to take on, hopefully it's unique, then it's possible to enter. And then the third aspect is to really go for it, have some base here. There's a big Turkish diaspora here, for instance. If you really want to commit yourself to this market, it only costs about £40, I think, still, to set up a company in the UK. If they have the residency, they can do that. And then you have to have the right sort of, obviously, finances and balance sheet to help support that. And by the way, that also, I don't know whether they're going to talk about this, but if you want to access growth capital in the private markets in the UK, it's far easier in the pecking order if you were to be British-based. And sort of angels and family funds can certainly be more interested because of the EIS scheme we have over here, the Enterprise Investment Scheme, which gives tax breaks, etc. So having that commitment through all the processes and the products, like I said, allows you to go into the UK in earnest and set up here relatively easily. But the technicalities aside, you've got to have your business set up for that. International expansion is, like I said, quite an investment, but a market the size of the UK is worth aiming for if you've got everything sorted out up front. Wonderful.
And Ian, what do you think?
Yes, delighted to be here. Looking forward to meeting many of you later. At GoToMarket Global, we run a workshop program where we help tech companies, mid-market tech and digital companies expand internationally. And in the last 18 months, we've helped 400 such organizations with their expansion plans and with funding. And through that, I think there's some really great things coming out of this discussion. What we find is that 75% plus of those organizations are deeply, perhaps a little bit forceful, but certainly very concerned about customer acquisition in an overseas market. So I think mapping that to companies from Turkey coming to the UK, same situation. And what we find is it's typically a mixture of, does your brand work and resonate in an overseas country where the culture and the positioning and the competitive landscape is likely to be very different? Do your digital strategy and techniques work in a foreign country? What are the routes to market? What are the traditional processes in those geographies? Understanding that and getting that right can be the difference between success and failure. I think also for coming to the UK, there are some fantastic tax breaks, and getting your corporate structure set up to maximize those opportunities, and R&D grants, and in fact a lot of support from UK government, both inbound and outbound. Certainly understanding what's available and tapping into that is important. And then the third piece there, I think, is around compliance. We heard earlier about GDPR. Quite clearly the focus of a lot of attention at the moment in the UK and across Europe. How will it pan out? That's something that we have to watch carefully. But I think it will drive organizations to look differently at their strategies and to start to think about customer acquisition and list building in particular in slightly different ways. And I think, therefore, another part of this is also how do you drive maximum differentiation with your product. And it was absolutely fascinating listening to Jakob talk about the way, as a tech organization, they had listened to their customers and then put a smart strategy in place which reflected the needs of the audience. That was the subscription rollover effect. Absolutely fantastic. And that sort of differentiation, again, in what is a saturated market, UK saturated, US very saturated, and also quite a mature market. We work with 75% of those 400 companies expanding to the US. In fact, 85%, not surprisingly, huge market. But the Americans in particular are very strong with digital. They're advanced with what they do. Their techniques are very strong. So you're competing not on a level playing field to start with, and therefore anything that you can do to gain that competitive advantage, really very useful. And just the final thing I would say is that we, at the GTM Global brand, we work with scale-ups that, in theory, have nailed it with their home markets. But actually what we find often is when you start to explore their understanding of the market and the customer and the personas and the very important things that will help drive your strategy, a lot of that is just not been worked through. And so when the wind is in the wrong direction, you can catch a serious cold if you don't get those things nailed.
Okay, wonderful. So to maybe touch a point on that, I think when a Turkish startup comes to the UK, the customers want to see UK references. So I think your first few references are in value more important than your next 20. So it requires extreme dedication, investment to get those first few references right and renewed possible. And then with that you can build a business, you can get new customers, funding, then you might be able to get funding. So references and traction is what's required. Tax breaks. Turkey and UK have the most aggressive angel investing tax breaks in Europe. UK, the tax break works probably a bit better because the tax system here is very well established. And so that's something to look into as well. And so in the last 5 or 10 minutes, if you have a question, please raise your hand. We'll try to address it. I'll ask try to put forward one question to each of you next. So you are providing digital marketing services to technology startups, scale-ups, especially B2B. So for them, it's a matter of, well, can I do this? Can I get CMO and marketing people, or should I work with external sources such as MBT? So what are the trade-offs? And yeah, can you tell us in 2 minutes or 3 minutes some guidelines for that?
I'll try to keep it short. Let's look at what are the main critical issues for a Turkish scale-up want to go global, or let's say come to UK. Actually, I can also divide it into 3 critical factors. The first one will be the strategy development part. It is very critical especially for a B2B company, to define their persona and their value proposition, who you are selling and what value you provide to them. Because at all the marketing tactics, you're gonna try to communicate accordingly. That's why setting up the persona and defining your value proposition will be the first critical factor. And secondly, all the marketing efforts should be tracking end-to-end, because while a scale-up is going global with the limited resources, the main problem will be spending their budget and in the most appropriate way. The best way is tracking all the actions. By the actions, what I mean, sending an email, giving a Facebook or LinkedIn ads, all the actions, according to the conversion. What a conversion means is, for example, for a cybersecurity company, it is the generated leads and qualified leads, or maybe a potential sales volume. And for an e-commerce company, it's a pure revenue or return on ad spend. That's why, after setting up the person and value proposition, tracking all the actions end to end, and finally, orchestrating all the marketing actions according to the KPIs, and roughly for all of the brands who want to go global, they're going to have two key metrics. One of them will be brand metrics, like direct traffic or brand organic search. And the second one will be performance metrics. And in the performance metrics, as I say, if it's B2B, it will be the generated lead and potential sales volume or purely sales. And if it's B2C, it will be purely revenue. That's why I can sum up with these three critical factors.
Okay. And Elias, for now you go into UK companies looking for growth financing and scaling up. Yeah. What do you want to see when you go in, and what happens, and then what happens afterwards? Can you give us a sense of what's happening there?
We're on the meter there. Yeah. It's the huge clock that's staring at us. Look, essentially, there's a ton of private money in the UK. I mean, last year, we believe about 4 billion was put into businesses that are doing between 1 to 5 million of revenues. So this is what we call the small to mid-market. That's through about 600 deals out of potentially about 20 billion of available money. So there's a lot of money chasing businesses with traction. So like I said, they've got some serious revenues there. But ultimately, whether you're about to drop $1 million or more so, you need to have the workflows and some kind of causality in place to show how you got there. I mean, did you literally just land a few contracts because they came to you? So how do you replicate that? How do you scale that? Of course, if you were to have done things, probably more common the case, to have gone out and brought in business, then you need to be able to capture that, to be able to show if you were to take on someone else's money and you put an extra dollar, incremental dollar into growing your business, that will have some kind of similar causal effect. And a lot of that is to do with building out your workflows and knowing agnostically what are the roles and responsibilities to deliver this machine, rather than, and this is typically the case, of course, rather than having the people that you've had with you from the beginning be put into place and have the roles fit around them, because that's not always going to be the case. So it's a challenge at this point of the market to get the balance right between the people who have taken you where you've got to and having a system in place where those people need to find a role. They cannot be sort of caught in the middle, because the investment that does come in is going to require performance and deliverables, and it doesn't really, other people's money means other people can ask questions about the business and not particularly care about the relationships involved. And in order to access that money in the UK, to answer your question specifically, if you can show that up front, it's far better, because ultimately you'll go through a process of courting with investors, probably through a broker or a corporate finance individual, and you'll be having some due diligence applied, probably right towards the end, and it's quite an examination, and you could fall out the hurdle there. Even if you do, when you do get through that, you're still kind of feeling a bit roughed up. Far better to go in, like in any negotiation, feeling a bit more muscular, feeling like you're on the front foot, and that gets you better leverage, because ultimately there's a buyer and a seller. You're selling and there's a buyer, and that buyer is going to continually ask questions and have the leverage in a negotiation. Far better for you to have some leverage too, to show, look, this company is strong, this company is going places, I know why it's getting there, and ultimately you might have more people coming to you so you can play them off. But the outset is the other way around, of course, because you're knocking on the doors. So that's the key thing. If you've got the traction, prove how you've done it, and have that built out agnostically, and prepare yourself for what would be very, very thorough questions down the line.
And don't forget, if you have some strong data points, then that will help drive up your valuation. So that's very important as well, part of that negotiation process.
Yeah, I mean, I was part of a raise last year for a business, a health tech, that raised 4 million in the end. It was doing about 4 million of revenue, just below 1 million of EBIT. And it wasn't able to show its causality until some work was done to try to illuminate what happened. And when that was done, this was during the actual meeting of investment houses, you suddenly saw a lot more interest from the funds, to the point where that individual, that entrepreneur, had a lot more leverage when it came to securing the deal, because that's a whole hornet's nest of permutations. You can raise, of course, but ultimately you want to be able to raise on your terms. So it's fully aligned. I'm not saying that investors typically try to screw you. That's not the case. But it's far better going in there with your eyes open, and having that done beforehand is better. In situ, okay, but certainly not at the end, because it will be probably too late for you to try to then negotiate on your strengths.
Okay, so I think we're out of time, but I did have one more question to Ian. If Arda lets us, maybe we can have a 1-2 sentence answer. So in your GTM workshops, I've been to them, the scale-up goes there and there's 10 or 15 resources to help them with all different kinds of things they might need. Sales, biz dev, PR, marketing. That's a huge orchestration effort. So what do you recommend to scale-ups, how to manage working with all different kind of advisors? Should a co-founder give like half of their time basically managing all this team? And how to decide what to do in-house and what to work with advisors and consultants?
In 2 sentences?
Yes. 3, I don't know.
Okay, 3, thank you. I think the important thing is to come to the country and be here and spend some time scouting and tapping into the often free resources that government inbound and outbound can offer. And then I think also being in the social tech scene, if you're a tech business, whatever scene, be in that scene, get to know people. For a lot of the work we do, whether it's B2B or B2C, it's about working with channel partners and maybe doing joint ventures. And don't forget the reach that can bring very, very quickly if you get that right. But it's very difficult getting those relationships remotely. So very important to be here and leverage that.
Can I just add to that very quickly? If you are really committed to get into this country, I mean, it's very easy to walk into a bar and a cafe in East London or whatever. You can just make the connections. But to save yourself the time, you are going to be constructing a board already probably, but certainly for growth. And find yourself an NED, non-executive director, who's au fait, familiar with both Turkey and the UK, and can open doors, and it just helps the case when you're selling.
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful, and hopefully more of you here will create stories as Gram Games. Probably you heard they they exited for 250 million, and I think they got investment less than 2 million. So that's an amazing success story there, and hopefully in the next panel we'll hear more such stories. And thank you very much for the panel. Thank you for Webrazzi, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you.